Sammy Davis Jr. walked into a music store in 1961, looking to buy a guitar. The white employee took one look at him and said, "You people don't understand real music. These instruments are for serious musicians." What Sammy did next didn't just silence the store. It changed how that man viewed talent for the rest of his life. It was a Saturday afternoon in September 1961, and Sammy Davis Jr. was doing something that should have been simple: shopping for a guitar. He'd been thinking about adding more live instrumentation to his performances, and his musical director had suggested he learn some basic guitar to accompany himself on certain songs. Sammy had chosen Hartley's Music on Sunset Boulevard in West Hollywood, a well-respected shop known for carrying quality instruments. It wasn't the biggest music store in Los Angeles, but it had a reputation for expertise and customer service. At least, that's what he'd been told. The store was busy that afternoon, with several customers browsing the selection of guitars, drums, and keyboards. Sammy was dressed casually, but well-pressed slacks, a button-down shirt, and a light jacket. Nothing flashy, nothing that screamed entertainment star. He wanted to shop in peace without drawing attention to himself. He made his way to the guitar section, where several instruments hung on the wall and others were displayed on stands. There were acoustic guitars, electric guitars, and everything in between. Sammy was particularly interested in a beautiful acoustic Martin that was prominently displayed. Not the most expensive guitar in the store, but a quality instrument that caught his eye. As he approached the guitar section, a store employee noticed him. The man was in his 40s, thin, with carefully groomed hair, and the kind of mustache that suggested he took himself very seriously. His name tag read Walter, and he had the bearing of someone who considered himself an expert. Walter looked Sammy up and down with an expression that immediately made it clear this wasn't going to be a pleasant interaction. There was something in his eyes, a combination of suspicion, dismissal, and barely concealed hostility that Sammy had seen too many times before. "Can I help you?" Walter asked, but his tone suggested that helping was the last thing he wanted to do. "Yes," Sammy said politely. "I'm interested in looking at some acoustic guitars. That Martin caught my eye." Walter glanced at the guitar Sammy was pointing to, then back at Sammy. "That's a $500 instrument. It's not a toy." "I understand that," Sammy said, maintaining his pleasant demeanor. "I'm looking for a quality guitar to use professionally." Walter's expression shifted from dismissive to openly skeptical. "Professionally? What kind of professional work are you talking about?" The way Walter emphasized professional made it clear he doubted that Sammy could possibly have any legitimate professional use for a guitar. But Sammy had dealt with this kind of attitude countless times in his career. He knew the best approach was to remain calm and professional. "I'm a performer," Sammy said simply. "I'd like to add guitar to some of my acts." "A performer." Walter repeated the words like they had a bad taste. "What kind of performing? Because I should tell you that Martin isn't for someone who just wants to strum a few chords around a campfire." "I understand. I'm looking for a serious instrument." Walter looked around the store, then leaned closer to Sammy and lowered his voice. "Listen, I don't want to be rude, but you people don't understand real music. These instruments are for serious musicians, people who've studied music, who understand technique and theory. That Martin has been handcrafted by artisans who've spent decades perfecting their craft." The words hit Sammy like a slap. "You people." He'd heard those words before, and he knew exactly what Walter meant by them. "I assure you I have great respect for craftsmanship and musical technique," Sammy said, his voice still calm but with a slight edge. "Look," Walter continued, either not noticing Sammy's tone or not caring, "I'm not trying to be difficult, but expensive instruments like these require a certain level of sophistication, a certain understanding of music that comes from proper training and background." Other customers in the store were beginning to notice the conversation. A young man testing an electric guitar had stopped playing and was listening. An older woman looking at sheet music was glancing over with interest. "What kind of background are you referring to?" Sammy asked. Walter straightened up, clearly feeling he was on solid ground. Classical training, music theory, understanding of composition and arrangement. The kind of education you get at conservatories and universities. Not just picking up rhythms from the kind of music your people typically play. The racist implications were becoming impossible to ignore. Walter wasn't just questioning Sammy's ability to play guitar. He was dismissing an entire cultural tradition of black music as somehow inferior or less sophisticated. "And what kind of music do you think my people typically play?" Sammy asked, his voice still controlled, but with steel underneath. "You know what I mean," Walter said, waving his hand dismissively. "Folk music, spirituals, that kind of thing. Simple music. Nothing that would require the kind of instrument you're looking at." By now, the conversation had attracted more attention. Several customers had stopped what they were doing to listen, and another store employee had emerged from the back room. "So you're saying I'm not qualified to play that guitar?" Sammy said. "I'm saying that guitar is designed for serious musicians, people who understand complex harmonies, sophisticated techniques, advanced musical concepts. It's not for casual playing." Sammy looked at the guitar, then back at Walter. "Would you mind if I tried it?" Walter's face showed alarm. "Oh no! Absolutely not. That's a $500 instrument. I can't have customers who don't know what they're doing potentially damaging it." "How do you know I don't know what I'm doing?" "Because," Walter started, then seemed to realize he was about to say something that would make his racism even more explicit. He searched for a more diplomatic way to express his prejudice. "Because you haven't demonstrated any musical credentials. Anyone can claim to be a performer." The store had gotten quieter as more people became aware of the tension between Sammy and Walter. Even customers who weren't directly listening were sensing that something significant was happening. "What if I could demonstrate some musical credentials?" Sammy asked. Walter looked uncomfortable. He clearly wanted to refuse. But he was beginning to realize that other customers were watching, and his behavior was becoming difficult to defend. "I suppose. If you could show me some basic technique, but I'm warning you, that guitar is very expensive, and I'll be watching very carefully." "I understand," Sammy said. "I'll be very careful with it." Walter reluctantly took the Martin down from its stand and handed it to Sammy with obvious reluctance. "Please be gentle. This is a professional instrument." Sammy took the guitar and adjusted the strap. The instrument felt good in his hands. Well balanced, quality construction, exactly what he'd expected from a Martin. He strummed a few chords softly, checking the tuning, and getting a feel for the guitar's voice. "It's a beautiful instrument," Sammy said genuinely. "Yes? Well, don't get too attached to it," Walter replied. "I just want to see that you can handle it properly." What happened next would be talked about in that music store for decades. Sammy began to play, and immediately it was clear that Walter had made a catastrophic error in judgment. Sammy's fingers moved across the fretboard with the precision and confidence of a master musician. He started with a complex fingerpicking pattern that demonstrated both technical skill and musical sensitivity. But it wasn't just technique, it was the musicality that was breathtaking. Sammy played with the kind of expression and soul that couldn't be taught in any conservatory. Every note had meaning, every phrase had purpose. The guitar seemed to come alive under his hands. The store went completely silent. The young man who'd been testing the electric guitar put his instrument down and walked over. The woman with the sheet music abandoned her browsing. Other customers emerged from different sections of the store, drawn by the sound of something extraordinary happening. Sammy moved through a series of musical styles, demonstrating not just versatility, but mastery of each genre. He played classical passages with perfect technique, jazz progressions with sophisticated harmonic understanding, blues with soul-crushing emotional depth, and folk melodies with delicate beauty. Walter stood frozen, his mouth slightly open, watching this performance that was destroying every assumption he'd made about Sammy's musical ability. Then Sammy began to sing. His voice, That distinctive instrument that had made him famous around the world filled the music store with warmth and power. He sang a song that wove together different musical traditions: spiritual, jazz, pop, and folk, creating something that was uniquely American and undeniably sophisticated. The small crowd that had gathered was mesmerized. This wasn't just a customer trying out a guitar. This was a masterclass in musical artistry happening spontaneously in a music store on a Saturday afternoon. When Sammy finished, the silence in the store was complete. Then someone started to applaud, and quickly others joined in. The sound of clapping filled the store as customers and employees alike showed their appreciation for what they'd just witnessed. Sammy carefully handed the guitar back to Walter, who took it with shaking hands. "You're right," Sammy said quietly. "It is a professional instrument. It has a beautiful voice." Walter stared at Sammy, his face cycling through embarrassment, shame, and something that might have been awe. "I don't understand," Walter stammered. Where did you learn to play like that?" "The same place all musicians learn," Sammy said gently. "Through study, practice, and love of music. There's no single path to musical understanding, Walter. It doesn't come from only conservatories or only universities. It comes from the heart, and it comes from dedication to the craft." "But you said you were just a performer." "I am a performer. I'm also a musician, a singer, a dancer, and someone who's spent my entire life studying and respecting music in all its forms." Walter looked around at the crowd that had gathered, then back at Sammy. "I owe you an apology. A huge apology. I made assumptions about you that were completely wrong." "You did," Sammy agreed. "But you're apologizing, which means you're capable of learning. That's more than some people can do. I said terrible things to you. About you and about black music. I was completely out of line." "You were," Sammy said. "But let me tell you something about black music, Walter. It's not simple. It's not unsophisticated. Jazz alone represents some of the most complex and innovative musical thinking in history. The blues contains emotional depth that classical composers spend lifetimes trying to achieve. Gospel music combines technical virtuosity with spiritual power in ways that can move mountains." The crowd listened as Sammy continued his impromptu lesson in musical appreciation. "Every musical tradition has its sophistication, Walter. Every culture has its masters. The mistake you made wasn't just about me. It was about dismissing entire traditions of musical excellence, because they don't fit your narrow definition of what serious music looks like." Walter nodded, looking like a man whose worldview was being fundamentally reconstructed. "Can I ask, who are you?" Walter said. "Because what I just heard, that wasn't just some local performer. That was something special." Someone in the crowd called out, "That's Sammy Davis Jr." Walter's face went white. "Sammy Davis Jr.? The Sammy Davis Jr.? I am," Sammy confirmed. "My God." Walter sat down heavily on a nearby stool. "I just told Sammy Davis Jr. that he didn't understand real music. I told one of the most famous entertainers in America that he wasn't sophisticated enough to play a guitar." "You did," Sammy said with a slight smile. "But you also just learned something important about making assumptions." "I feel sick," Walter said. "I am so incredibly sorry, Mr. Davis. There's no excuse for how I treated you." "Walter," Sammy said, walking over and putting a hand on the man's shoulder. "Everyone makes mistakes. The question is, what you do with the lesson afterward. I don't know how to make up for this." "You don't need to make up for anything with me," Sammy said. "But maybe next time a customer comes in here, you'll remember this moment. Maybe you'll listen to them play before you decide what kind of musician they are." Walter nodded emphatically. "I will. I absolutely will." The store manager had appeared from the back office, having heard about the commotion. He approached Sammy with obvious nervousness. "Mr. Davis, I am so sorry about this incident. Walter's behavior was completely unacceptable. We don't tolerate discrimination of any kind in this store." "I appreciate that," Sammy said. "But Walter and I have worked things out. He's learned something today, and so have I." "What did you learn?" the manager asked. That sometimes the most important performances happen in the most unexpected places, for the most unexpected audiences. Sammy spent another 20 minutes in the store, signing autographs, talking with customers, and giving encouragement to young musicians in the crowd. He bought the Martin guitar. Walter insisted on giving him the employee discount, which Sammy graciously accepted. As he was leaving, Walter approached him one more time. "Mr. Davis, can I ask you something?" "Of course. When I first started talking to you that way, when I said those things about you peoples, did you know right away that you were going to prove me wrong?" Sammy thought about it. "Walter, I didn't come here to prove anything to anybody. I just came here to buy a guitar. But when someone tells me I can't do something because of the color of my skin, well, I've been proving people wrong about that my entire life. Will you ever come back to this store? If I need another guitar, this is where I'll come," Sammy said. Good music stores are hard to find. Good people are worth investing in. Walter worked at Hartley's Music for another 25 years. He never again made assumptions about a customer's musical ability based on their appearance. The Martin guitar that Sammy had played became something of a legend in the store. Customers would ask to try the Sammy Davis guitar, and Walter would tell the story of that September afternoon when he learned that talent has no color. Years later, when Walter retired, he wrote a letter to Sammy, thanking him for the lesson in both music and humanity. Sammy wrote back, encouraging Walter to keep learning and growing, because that's what musicians do. The story of Sammy's visit to Hartley's Music became part of Los Angeles music folklore. It was told and retold as an example of how prejudice blinds people to beauty, and how grace and talent can transform even the most uncomfortable situations into opportunities for growth. When Sammy died in 1990, Walter attended his memorial service. During the sharing time, he stood up and told the story of that day in the music store, and how Sammy Davis Jr. had taught him that true musical sophistication isn't about where you studied or what you look like. It's about the depth of soul you bring to your art. If this incredible story of dignity under prejudice and the power of talent to change hearts moved you, make sure to hit that subscribe button and share this video with someone who needs to remember that assumptions about ability based on appearance are always wrong. Have you ever been underestimated because of how you look and gotten the chance to prove someone wrong? Let us know in the comments about those moments when your abilities surprised people who thought they had you figured out. And don't forget to ring that notification bell for more amazing stories about how talent and grace can overcome prejudice and ignorance.